Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
They left me out of the group chat. Again, no ping, no where are you, no you coming, not even a lazy LOL forgot to add you. Just silence, a digital kind of silence that somehow screams louder than any slammed door or shouted insult. I saw the posts about their wine night, the filtered boomerangs of clinking glasses, the snarky little inside jokes in the captions, the ones that I used to be part of once upon a time. But this time, this third time, something in me didn't just break. It rearranged. Not like a snapped bone, more like a joint shifting out of socket. Sudden, painful, and weirdly clarifying. It was a Wednesday evening when I saw it, their stories lining up like neat little jabs across the top of my screen. Taylor in her leather jacket, Jenna with her signature red lipstick, Heather laughing so hard she looked like she might fall out of her bar stool. And in the background, that booth in Bramble and Vine where we used to cram ourselves during college breaks, when we were broke but loyal. I stared at my phone for a moment too long, standing alone in my kitchen, a half-wilted salad on the counter in front of me and my cat Cheddar, curled on the windowsill like he'd long since stopped expecting company. I didn't cry. Not this time. I'd already done that after the first accidental exclusion, back when I gave them the benefit of the doubt, thought maybe they'd just missed me in the group message, even though I was literally in the last one. The second time stung more. When I saw photos of a baby shower I didn't know was happening until it had already ended. But I still made excuses, told myself I probably hadn't checked my phone enough, or maybe they thought I was busy, or out of town, or whatever fiction helped me swallow the ache. But the third time, that's not an accident. That's a pattern, that's a message. And sometimes, the only way to respond to a message is with one of your own, loud, clear, and impossible to scroll past. What made it worse, or maybe better in the most ironic sense, was that they had no idea what I'd been working on. No clue. Not a single congratulatory text or curious, "How's the business going?" even though the last time we had lunch. If you could even call that distracted, passive-aggressive 2-hour session lunch. I told them I was about to sign with a distribution partner. I didn't overshare. I'd learned that lesson already. Just gave them the headlines. My startup was growing, licensing deals were in motion, and things were starting to take off. They all nodded politely, some even smiled, but the air at that table was thin. Like we were playing a game of emotional chicken, waiting to see who'd blink first and acknowledge the shifting power dynamic they refused to name. They weren't happy for me. They were politely tolerating me. And now they weren't even pretending to do that anymore. So I opened my laptop. Didn't even sit down, just leaned over the counter, typed with one hand, while the other held a glass of wine I hadn't even planned to pour. I Googled Billboard rental near me, half joking, half possessed. I didn't really think I'd go through with it at first. It just felt good to fantasize. Something about the idea of turning my invisibility into something 15 feet high and impossible to miss felt necessary, not petty, not dramatic, just necessary, like reclaiming oxygen after being held underwater by people who smiled while they drowned you. I scrolled through options. Most were out of my budget, but then I saw it. A modest-sized board, just off Highway 67, right near the exit they all took to get home from their offices downtown. Prime location, constant traffic, visibility from both directions. I clicked. The form was straightforward. Upload image, insert text, schedule dates. I had the photo ready. A crisp, professional shot from my last brand shoot. One that radiated exactly what I needed. Not desperate, not bitter, just successful, calm, and self-contained. Like a woman who doesn't need to scream to be heard, but will if the silence drags on long enough. And the caption? That was easy. I didn't even have to think. I just typed, "The disappointment just got a multi-million-dollar deal. No emojis, no hashtags, just the truth, wrapped in a message they'd never be able to laugh off or excuse away." I stared at the screen for a long minute before I hit submit. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I expected adrenaline, panic, maybe guilt, but instead I felt still, grounded, like something that had been sitting in my chest for years had finally shifted into place. Cheddar meowed, as if sensing the moment. I poured a second glass of wine, this time with both hands steady. By morning, the order confirmation was in my inbox. Billboard goes live next Tuesday. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait for them to drive home. There's something cruel about slow rejection. Not the theatrical kind, not the shouting match or the storming out or the long dramatic text with 6 paragraphs of finality, but the kind that unfolds over months and years, in missed calls that were never returned, invitations that stopped coming, questions left unread, and silence that somehow got louder every time I opened my phone and saw that the group chat, once ours, was still alive, just not for me. It hadn't always been like this. We used to share everything: bad dates, dumb bosses, coffee orders, crying fits over missed promotions, passive-aggressive texts from boyfriends who didn't understand why Sunday brunch mattered. We had rules, traditions, nicknames. We had theme nights and shared Spotify playlists, and an ongoing joke about how we'd all end up living on the same block someday, raising kids who'd become best friends by default. And now I couldn't even get a pity invite to a midweek wine night that wasn't more than 10 blocks from my house. I think the worst part is that they didn't even lie. No excuses, no fake apologies, no half-hearted attempts to explain. Just silence, cold, steady, and deliberate. And maybe it would have been easier to understand if I'd done something, anything, to deserve it. If I had slept with someone's boyfriend or stolen someone's job or committed some other betrayal we could point to and say, there, that's when it broke. But that moment never came. What came instead was success, quiet, hard-earned, and apparently completely unforgivable. I hadn't told them everything, not because I was being secretive, but because I knew better. I'd learned over time which topics changed the energy at the table: money, progress, partnerships. Every time I brought up the business, the late nights building product specs for my apartment floor, the pitches I'd done in stale conference rooms full of men who smiled too wide and listened too little, the investor calls that made my voice shake, even though I knew my numbers cold. Their responses were always muted, cordial, polite, but never proud, never excited. There's a particular kind of tension that builds when you stop being the underdog and start becoming someone they can't pity anymore. You see it in their eyes before it shows up in their words. The last time I saw them in person, we met for drinks. An impromptu catch-up session Jenna threw together after we accidentally bumped into each other at Whole Foods. I should have known something was off the moment I walked in and saw the table already half full, the drinks already poured, and that empty seat just for show. I smiled, of course. I always smile. I told them about the contract I was negotiating with a major retailer, a licensing deal that would take my product into almost every household store in the country. It was a big deal, one I'd worked toward for years. But the only reaction I got was a slow sip of Chardonnay and a tight-lipped, "That's great, Rach," from Taylor, the same Taylor who once crashed on my couch for 2 weeks after getting fired and called me her emergency contact for life. She used to ask about my business, back when it was still cute and scrappy, when I was still making prototypes in my garage and shipping orders from the post office by hand. But when things started to scale, when I landed an angel investor and got my first warehouse space, the questions stopped. She asked once if she could pick my brain about branding, said she was working on a pitch for a client and needed a fresh take. I gave her more than I should have. Walked her through my framework, shared decks, even offered up some creative direction. I never got credit. I never saw the pitch, but I did hear, through the grapevine, that she nailed the meeting. And then, a month later, I saw an Instagram reel from her agency showcasing the campaign, one that looked strikingly familiar, down to the product mood board, the layout, and even a version of the tagline I'd written. I didn't call her out. I didn't ask questions. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was focused on bigger things, that karma had a long memory. But deep down, something settled inside me. Something dense and heavy and bitter, like a stone dropped into a still pond. I should have walked away then. I should have known. So when I submitted the final billboard design and hit confirm, I wasn't thinking about revenge. Not really. I wasn't hoping to ruin anyone's day or humiliate them or start some Instagram war full of vague subtweets and unspoken tension. I just wanted to be seen, truly seen, in a way they had refused to do for years. I wanted them to look up from their overpriced coffee, or their carpool, or their Friday morning hangovers, and feel what I had felt every time I scrolled through those stories and saw the camera pan past the seat I used to occupy. The photo I chose was simple: black blazer, white top, nothing flashy, just clean and unshakable. And the text? 6 words, no fluff. The disappointment just got a multi-million-dollar deal. That line had come to me in the shower 2 days earlier after I got the final approval from legal. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was bitter, sure, but it was earned. And it wasn't a shot in the dark. It was a mirror. I scheduled it for 1 full week. The rental cost more than I wanted to spend, but less than I expected. The moment I clicked submit payment, a calm I hadn't felt in years washed over me. Not joy, not vindication, but clarity. I hadn't outgrown them. They had chosen to shrink away from me. The next morning, I was standing in line at my usual coffee shop when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hi, this is Jessica from Highway Media Group," the voice said, professional but tense. "Someone just called in to cancel your billboard order, claiming to be you. We didn't process it, of course. Protocol. But we wanted to confirm it was unauthorized." I paused, the sound of steam hissing in the background, the scent of burnt espresso filling the air. "No," I said quietly. "That wasn't me." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then she said, "Figured. Just wanted you to know." I hung up, my coffee forgotten, and walked back to my car. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch, but my chest felt tight with something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not regret, anticipation. Someone knew, and they were already trying to stop me. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes the morning after you've done something irreversible, not chaos, not panic, but a thick suspended quiet, like the air before a storm, when everything is too calm and your own breath feels too loud inside your head. I woke up early that day, long before my alarm, long before the sun rose enough to cast light across the corner of my bedroom, where my suitcase still sat half unpacked from a business trip I hadn't even told them about. My phone screen was dark, undisturbed, no notifications, no last-minute regrets. Just that one email, marked confirmed, reminding me that by 8 a.m., traffic on Highway 67 would be moving at a crawl, and every car crawling along that stretch, including Taylor's sleek silver Audi, Jenna's boxy hybrid, and Heather's oversized SUV with the yoga bumper sticker, would be inching past my message. 5 meters wide, 15 meters above the ground. Impossible to miss. It wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. It was about presence. It was about making the kind of noise that doesn't need to be shouted, the kind that hums under your skin and forces people to feel something, even if they don't want to name it. I didn't plan to drive by. That had never been the point. But I found myself on that road anyway, coffee in hand, sunglasses on, windows up, letting the low buzz of talk radio fill the space between me and the decision I'd made. The board came into view slowly, like it always does on that bend near the gas station, and there it was, bigger than I imagined, cleaner than I expected, my face staring back at me with a calm, unsmiling expression that I knew would unnerve them more than anything else. I didn't linger, just glanced once, heart still and quiet, then took the next exit and looped back toward my office, where emails were already stacking and deadlines waited like nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had happened. Not just a billboard or a clever one-liner or a show of teeth. Something deeper, something permanent, like finally carving my name into a space I was never invited to claim. It wasn't long before the texts started coming. Not from them, of course, but from people I hadn't heard from in years. A former coworker sent a screenshot with a single line, "This you?" A cousin on my mom's side forwarded a news clip from a local segment. Anonymous entrepreneur sends unmissable message to ex-friends. And then the tags started. Instagram stories from strangers, photos taken from car windows, captions ranging from supportive to stunned to speculative. Apparently the message resonated. Apparently I wasn't the only one who'd ever been cut out cleanly and quietly. But behind all the viral noise, something else was stirring. Something darker, more specific, and harder to laugh off. That afternoon, as I stepped into the elevator after a long meeting with my legal advisor, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made the air leave my lungs in one sharp, silent push. "Taylor, nice billboard. Want to tell me why you stole my client?" I stared at the screen, fingers numb, pulse steady but heavy, like a drum beat behind my ribs. At least, I didn't think I had. The deal I closed last month had come through a referral. A consultant I'd met at a conference in Chicago, someone who'd seen my product in action and passed along my name. The contract had taken weeks to finalize, but at no point did it cross my mind that the client in question had previously been under someone else's purview, much less Taylor's. But now, seeing her name light up my phone, I couldn't deny what had become obvious. The billboard hadn't just hit a nerve. It had hit something real, something tangled. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to understand what she was talking about, needed to verify the connection. A few quick searches, a few forwarded emails from my assistant, and it all clicked into place. The company that signed with me had, in fact, been in negotiations with Taylor's firm 6 months earlier. They had walked away, quietly, no announcement, and gone dark. Until they came to me. Suddenly, the attempted cancellation made sense. Suddenly, the silence from the group didn't seem like oversight, but strategy. And as that realization spread through me like a slow, burning match, I felt something deeper than anger. Not triumph, not even satisfaction, but a clean, sharpened clarity. This hadn't been about brunch invites or forgotten birthdays. This had been about territory, and I had wandered, unknowingly, into land they thought they owned. By the end of the day, the group chat I wasn't part of had become a different kind of battlefield. Heather sent a DM next. No greeting, just a clipped sentence. "What exactly are you trying to prove?" Jenna liked a tweet about narcissistic self-promotion that, while not directly linked to me, had been quote-tweeted under a photo of the billboard. And Taylor, after a few hours of silence, followed up with a voice note. Short, clipped, and tight with control. "You made your point, Rachel, loud and clear, but don't think for a second people don't know what this is really about." I replayed that note twice, letting the tone sink in, hearing all the things she wasn't saying. And then, just before closing my laptop for the day, I received a calendar notification I hadn't set myself. It was an invite from Heather's assistant, a coffee meeting, just to talk, scheduled for the following morning at a cafe halfway between her office and mine. I almost deleted it, almost. But curiosity has a way of rewriting your schedule. I arrived 5 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and sat near the back, where the light was dim and the noise was low. Heather walked in exactly on time, her heels clicking against the tile, her face unreadable. She didn't hug me, didn't even smile. She sat down, pulled off her sunglasses, and stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "You really don't know what this is actually about, do you?" The question hung in the air like smoke, curling around everything unsaid between us. And I realized in that moment, I didn't. Not completely. But I was about to find out. There's a distinct kind of silence that falls when you realize the story you've been telling yourself. The one where you're just the passive casualty of someone else's cruelty. The one where you did nothing wrong and were simply left behind by people too petty or too insecure to celebrate your success. Might not be the full truth. It's not a loud crashing silence. Not the kind that shakes the room and makes your hands tremble. It's more like the subtle drop in pressure before an earthquake. The moment the air goes still and your skin prickles because you can sense something coming, something old and unfinished, crawling its way to the surface, whether you're ready or not. Heather didn't speak for a while after she asked that question, and I didn't push her. I just sat there, coffee cooling between my hands, eyes fixed on hers, waiting for whatever she thought I didn't know, whatever shadow she'd been keeping, to finally be said out loud. And when she did speak, her voice wasn't angry or accusing. It was tired, resigned, almost maternal in that condescending way she used to talk to us in college, when someone forgot to pay their half of the electric bill or hooked up with a guy she had quietly claimed as off limits. "You never asked," she said, stirring her drink without sipping it. "But maybe you should have." And then she laid it out, calmly and without apology, as if she'd been holding it in her teeth for years, just waiting for the right moment to spit it back at me. 3 years ago, back when my business was still just a fragile collection of ideas held together with duct tape, late nights, and blind ambition, I had written up a proposal, one I'd drafted over the course of several long weekends, fueled by too much coffee and not enough sleep, believing it might be the beginning of something real. I had shared that proposal with Jenna first, because she was always the pragmatic one, the editor, the one who caught typos and gave notes like a corporate exec. Not warm, but sharp, efficient, and usually right. I'd asked her to take a look, to tell me if it was viable, if the numbers made sense, if I was out of my depth. She said she would. What she didn't say, what I never knew, was that she had forwarded the document to Taylor, without telling me, without asking. According to Heather, it wasn't malicious at first, just curiosity. Taylor had been consulting for a firm that worked with small startups, and Jenna thought she might have insights, maybe even help make connections. But instead of offering advice or opening a door, Taylor had taken pieces. Not all of it, not enough to constitute theft in a courtroom, but enough to twist it into something she could mold as her own. The language changed, the format evolved, but the bones, the pitch, the structure, the product market vision, those were mine. Heather said she hadn't known right away. She only found out months later, in passing, when Taylor let it slip during a drunken night that she'd helped shape a client proposal that sounded a little too familiar. But by then the deal had gone through, the credit had been given, and the circle had closed in tight. No one said anything. No one warned me. They just started fading me out. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because I had become a liability. A threat to the fragile balance of power that kept them comfortable. I didn't speak for a long time after Heather finished. I just sat there, heart thudding dully, head buzzing with a strange mix of grief and disbelief, trying to stitch this new information into the story I'd been carrying. The version where I was left out simply because I was too successful, too independent, too busy building something they couldn't understand. But this version was messier. In this version, I had been wronged, yes, but I had also been naive, trusting, careless with my boundaries, and unwilling to see the truth when it was right in front of me. Heather reached for her bag and stood up before I could say anything. "We're not villains, Rach," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "But we're not your friends anymore either. Not really. That ended a long time ago. You just didn't notice." She walked out before I could respond, leaving me with a cup of untouched coffee and a head full of fractures. I sat there for almost an hour, not because I didn't have anything to do. I had a full schedule, emails to answer, a meeting with my creative director in 40 minutes, but because something inside me had started to collapse in slow motion, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. That night, I lay in bed, phone on my chest, scrolling through old texts I hadn't read in years. Birthday messages, inside jokes, voice notes that used to make me laugh until I cried. There was a sweetness to them, a tenderness I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time, and I hated that I missed them. I hated that despite everything, the betrayal, the exclusion, the quiet theft, some part of me still wanted to go back to the version of us where things hadn't gone sour yet. But time doesn't move backward, and neither should I. So the next morning, instead of taking down the billboard, like I'd briefly considered in a moment of weakness, I made a call. Not to the media, not to a lawyer, not to anyone who could spin the story into something digestible. I called the same company that had rented me the first space, and I booked another one. Bigger this time, facing the freeway, twice the exposure, twice the traffic, and positioned just before the exit ramp to the same cluster of offices where Taylor and Jenna both worked. The new design was stark, even simpler than the first. No photo, no branding, just white text on black. I built it from nothing. You'll never erase me again. I didn't add a name. I didn't need to. And as I hit submit, watching the confirmation email roll in, I didn't feel like I had won anything. I didn't feel powerful or triumphant or smug. I felt free, but freedom, I've learned, often comes with a cost. And I had no idea what mine was yet, only that it was coming. The morning the second billboard went up, the city was still wrapped in that early haze that makes everything look softer than it really is. The sky smudged gray with the promise of heat later, the sidewalks still damp from the sprinklers, and the traffic slow but steady, filled with tired commuters sipping gas station coffee and flipping through talk radio stations as they inched their way toward a day that probably looked just like the one before. But for me, everything felt different, not because something had changed in the world, but because something inside me had finally settled, not in the peaceful way that brings comfort, but in the way tectonic plates settle after a long, drawn-out earthquake, permanent, irreparable, and unmistakably final. I didn't go see it in person this time. Didn't feel the need to stare up at my words like I needed validation or proof that I had done it. I already knew it was real, and besides, the notifications had started before I'd even finished my morning coffee. The photos came in waves. Some from people I knew vaguely, some from anonymous accounts tagging my business profile, and others from journalists who had picked up the first Billboard story and now wanted to know if this new one meant something more. They all wanted a statement, some kind of neat little quote they could wedge into a headline, something empowering and bite-sized like "Woman Fights Back" or "Founder Reclaims Power." But I didn't give them anything, not because I was trying to be mysterious or clever. I was simply done explaining myself. The first billboard had been for them, whether I admitted it or not. It had been a message aimed like a dart at a very specific wall, a wall I had once belonged behind. Among girls who used to braid each other's hair and borrow each other's shoes and whisper secrets at sleepovers about who they'd marry and where they'd live and what they'd name their future daughters. It had been a scream disguised as a smile, a final attempt to be heard by people who had long since stopped listening. But the second billboard, the one in black and white, the one with no face, no branding, no need for interpretation, that wasn't for them anymore. That was for me. It's strange, the kinds of people who show up when something you do goes viral. Old professors, distant cousins, former flings who left you on red and now want to reconnect because they always knew you'd do something bold. A woman I hadn't spoken to since college sent me a DM at 2 a.m. just to say she once felt invisible too, and that maybe if she'd had the courage to do what I did, she wouldn't have spent 10 years in a job that made her feel like wallpaper. Another message came from a girl in Idaho who said she screenshotted the billboard and set it as her phone background to remind herself not to play small anymore. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. The message had landed where it was supposed to. Not in the inboxes of those who betrayed me, but in the hearts of strangers who had nothing to gain from pretending to understand me. But still, something lingered. Not regret, not even sorrow. Just a strange, flickering awareness that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. And that maybe, deep down, a part of me had always wanted to. 3 days after the second billboard went up, an article dropped in a popular business newsletter. Not one I subscribed to, but one I had always respected. It wasn't about the betrayal or the friendship or the drama. It was about branding, visibility, and how one woman turned personal pain into a viral marketing campaign without ever naming names or stooping to internet theatrics. They called it guerrilla grief, a term that made me laugh, not because it was wrong, but because it was so unintentionally perfect. And suddenly my inbox was no longer full of gossip. It was full of offers, partnerships, speaking gigs, even a few investment inquiries. I didn't jump at any of them. I was still deciding what I wanted now that I no longer needed to prove anything. That night, I went for a drive, not toward the billboards, but out of the city, into the kind of winding back roads that used to scare me when I was younger. Before I realized the silence they offered wasn't empty, it was clarifying. I turned off my music, rolled down the windows, and let the air rush in, cold and sharp, cutting through the noise of my thoughts like a blade through silk. I thought about the girls I used to call sisters, the ones who had known my childhood fears, my teenage heartbreaks, my awkward 20s filled with cheap wine and questionable fashion choices. I thought about how far I'd come, not in terms of money or success, but in terms of distance. Emotional, psychological, spiritual. The kind of distance that no GPS could measure. When I got home, there was a package on my doorstep. Plain, brown, no return address. Inside was an envelope, thick with something hard and flat. I opened it slowly, unsure of what I was about to find. What I pulled out was a printed version of my original proposal, the one I had sent to Jenna all those years ago. Annotated in red pen, with sections crossed out, suggestions scribbled in the margins, and one single word written in bold letters across the front page. Ambitious. No name, no explanation, just that word. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, fingers suddenly cold. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't apologetic. It was something in between, a message from the past, or maybe a reminder that none of this had been as simple as betrayal and revenge. Maybe there were regrets on their side too. Or maybe it was just someone trying to remind me of where it all began. Before the silence, before the exclusion, before the sharp line between us had been drawn in digital ink and emotional distance. I didn't tell anyone about the package. Didn't post it, didn't frame it, didn't burn it. I slid it into a drawer and closed it quietly, the way you tuck away something sacred. Not because you're afraid of it, but because you finally understand its place in your story. And that night, for the first time in months, maybe years, I slept through the night without waking. Not because everything was healed, but because I had finally stopped waiting for an answer that was never mine to receive. They left me out of the group chat, but I left them behind.